Senator from the great state of Ohio.
We're about to enter a historic moment in this chamber. We're going to take up a bill called the One Big Beautiful Bill. If you've been watching the media over the last maybe 6 months, you've heard all kinds of absolute misinformation about this bill. I've had a chance to read it. I know, Mr. President, you have also. It's an absolutely historic and transformative piece of legislation that reverses 4 years of an assault on American workers. Let me just give you some of the facts. These are indisputable facts, and I want everybody watching this to remember this as you listen to probably what's going to be 30-plus hours of complete nonsense from the other side. So let's start with number one. Nobody who works for a living in this country knows better what's happened to them over the last 4 years than they do. They've seen inflation crush them. The price of a home became unaffordable. The price of an automobile became unaffordable. The price of groceries became a luxury. You go to the grocery store and you bring your normal order to the cashier and you think there's no way that can be my grocery bill. That was all policies that were driven by the other side's ridiculous assault on American workers. So what are we going to do about it? American workers have very seldom actually been represented in this chamber. This chamber has done a very good job of representing special interest groups and lobbyists, but here's what American workers get out of the One Big Beautiful Bill. Number one, to address the price of automobiles, which, by the way, have been coming down under President Trump's term, despite the misinformation that car prices would soar. Let me just say that again. The price of automobiles has come down in the first 6 months of this year versus going up $8,000 during the Biden years. So what are we doing to make even it more affordable to own an automobile? We're going to allow full deductibility of any interest paid on car loans if the car is made in America. That is a significant relief for American workers. Secondly, no income tax on tips, overtime, or Social Security. A huge relief. That's probably about $1,500 to $2,500 extra in your pocket from not having to pay income tax on tips, overtime, or Social Security. And on top of that, the One Big Beautiful Bill prevents about a $5,000 per American worker per year income tax increase. So can you imagine the Democrats are going to come on this floor and fight this bill and say it helps billionaires when they know that if we don't pass this bill, every American worker will pay $5,000 more in income taxes next year and for all years to come. Under Joe Biden, we had over 10 million illegals invade our country. I wasn't born in this country. I was born in South America. I had the honor and the privilege of being welcomed to this nation. Who did Joe Biden welcome? Not legal immigrants like myself, but rather people who broke our laws to come here. And what was the result? They drove up our housing prices. They drove up our insurance premiums. They lowered the wages for American workers. They crippled our cities, and crime surged. So what does the One Big Beautiful Bill do, Mr. President? It funds the Immigration and Customs Enforcement so that we can get these people out of our country. They should never have been allowed to come here. We have 5,000 border agents trying to get rid of 600,000 criminal aliens. These aren't just people who came here illegally. That was a crime in of itself. This is 600,000 people who committed another crime, Mr. President, and we don't have the resources to deport them. This bill gives us the money to do that. You know, you have kids, I have kids, Mr. President. Raising kids has become really, really expensive. I was one of 7. My dad was one of 11. My grandfather was one of 23. I only have 4, underperformer. Raising kids is really, really hard, really expensive. What does this bill do? It gives every working American $2,200 per child per year. $2,200 per child per year to help alleviate with the cost of raising kids. In addition, this is something new and exciting. You have a birth of an American baby in this country, and the federal government will put $1,000 into a bank account. Companies, your employers, nonprofits, whatever group wants to, they can put money in that account. That account will grow with an index. And when that child who's born here in America, an American citizen, by the time they get to be 25 or 30 years old, Mr. President, guess what? They can have a decent little sum of money, a couple $100,000. They can use it for education, for upskilling, whatever they want. Nobody's ever done that to help American workers in that way, and we can do that. Now, look, healthcare is a massive expense. You're a doctor. You know what's going on in our healthcare system. It is crushing working families. What does the One Big Beautiful Bill do? It provides funding for health savings accounts, so you can use pre-tax dollars to fund it. So if there's that emergency, that you can have that to tap into. Huge improvement. And of course, let me just be crystal clear. This bill does not touch Social Security in any way whatsoever, even though I've had to listen to my colleagues over and over again for the last 6 months saying that we're eliminating, crushing, destroying Social Security. We do not touch Social Security. We don't touch Medicare at all. Let me repeat that. We don't touch Social Security or Medicare, despite how many online videos they do, or how many press interviews they do, or how much time the media repeats that misinformation. We don't touch Social Security or Medicare. Now, on Medicaid, here's what we do. We strengthen it. In fact, in my state in Ohio, the hospitals will get more money to provide Medicaid to the people that need it, the disabled, pregnant women, children, older Americans who are in need. We are giving them more money. We will spend more money on Medicaid with the One Big Beautiful Bill than if we don't do it. Is that something that you've heard from the other side? Completely the opposite. Now, what we are doing is we're eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse, which has been rampant in that system. And we're starting the process of reforming the way the states and the federal government's relationship works in Medicaid. The states have abdicated that responsibility. We're working to reset that in a very methodical way. And for working Americans who are able-bodied, Mr. President, we're asking to do what Bill Clinton wanted, which is to put a work requirement on able-bodied adults. Let's define that. What does able-bodied mean? Between 18 and 60, no disabilities, no dependent children, you can work. And then what is the work requirement? 80 hours a month of either work, volunteering, community service, or upskilling, going to a place like, for example, Cuyahoga Community College or Kent State University or Columbus State University, where they can go in and get a skill that allows them to come into the workforce. Very common sense, not controversial at all, but you'll hear the other side say that we're kicking 16 million people off health insurance. I can't even count how many meetings I've had with my Republican colleagues. As you know, Mr. President, we meet quite often, hundreds and hundreds of meetings. And our North Star, the center of gravity for our party, is how do we help Americans? See, putting America first means that we're going to put our resources to help American citizens. The other side, they want to give hundreds of billions of dollars to illegals. They want to have states be able to take that Medicaid money that's for American citizens and give it to people who shouldn't even be in this country. That doesn't even pass the common sense basic test. So what the One Beautiful Bill does is it strengthens Medicaid for generations to come. I'm very proud of that part of the bill. That's not, as the infomercial would say, but wait, there's more. Biden and the radical Democrats made the world more dangerous. Turn on the TV. Any day of the week for the last 4 years, every part of the globe was more dangerous because of the weakness of Joe Biden. The One Big Beautiful Bill makes a historic investment in our military. Our military was demoralized, depleted, stretched too thin, out of basic equipment. We invest in that. What's happened already? Record recruitment. In fact, the gentleman that worked with me on the campaign, Robbie Brooks, he can't listen to this because he's in basic training with the Marines. He met Secretary Hegseth in my office. In fact, my entire office gave him a standing ovation when he came in to talk to me during his nomination process. Robbie was so inspired by Secretary Hegseth that he came to me the next day much to my dismay, because Robbie was a great member of the team, and said, you know what? I never thought about it in my life. I'm 24 years old. I'm going to go be a Marine because I love this country. That's what we're doing. An historic investment in our military and in our Coast Guard. The drug cartels are bringing all kinds of illicit drugs, not just through land, but now through sea, and we're making certain that we have the resources to protect our mainland. And as anyone who's flown lately, especially those of us who come to Washington, D.C. every week, you fly, you know the delays, you know what's going on with our air traffic control system. This air traffic control system should have been addressed years ago, well before you and I got here. Decades, honestly, before you and I got here. This should have been dealt with. They talked about it. Every Secretary of Transportation, every president talked and acknowledged that our air traffic control system was a mess and it needs to be modernized. What does the One Big Beautiful Bill do? It makes an historic investment in our nation's air traffic control system, something that will help every American. That's what this bill does. Now, here's the last piece. My Democrat colleagues will talk about how this adds to the deficit, which is factually inaccurate. Actually, for the first time in my lifetime, we have a bill before Congress that will reduce spending. We've never seen that. They passed something called the Inflation Reduction Act that blew a hole in our deficit, did the exact opposite of reducing inflation. In fact, inflation went up. Let me give you an example of what that bill did, Mr. President, because I don't think this has been well reported. If you're a multi-millionaire, in fact, they like to talk about billionaires now because most of them, by the way, are millionaires. I'm not sure how that happened. That's a different conversation for a different day. But they like to talk about billionaires. You could have a billionaire walk into a Rolls-Royce dealership. A billionaire walk into a Rolls-Royce dealership, buy a $500,000 Rolls-Royce, and decide to lease it, and the Democrats gave that billionaire a check for $7,500 to offset the cost of that Rolls-Royce. Now, what does a $7,500 credit do for you in a Rolls-Royce? Well, the umbrella that comes in the door is $12,000. Doesn't quite cover the cost of that. The monograms on the headrest are about $5,000, so you can cover that with the $7,500. You won't cover anywhere near the cost of the audio system. It's $22,000. Think about how sick that is. They come on the floor and say that we're helping billionaires when they're giving $7,500 checks to people who lease these kinds of cars. It's sick. What are we doing? We're getting rid of all these Green New scams. We're cutting the budget deficit. We're finally putting fiscal responsibility. It's the reason, Mr. President, why in the last 6 months, here's what we've seen. Inflation has never been lower. Gas prices are way down. Egg prices are way down. The stock market is at a record high. Remember the stock market that the Democrats were saying it was going to be 1932 all over again just 60 days ago? Record. Not record this year. All-time record. All-time record. Now, they said tariffs were going to destroy the economy. Not true. And this One Big Beautiful Bill does all of these things and reduces our deficit. What's holding us back? Why can't we pass this piece of legislation that helps working Americans? I'm old enough to remember when the Democrat Party was a party of the working class. This is the kind of bill that most Democrats would have advocated for 20, 30 years ago. The center, the North Star, the guiding post for this bill is, does it help our middle class? Does it help working Americans? This bill does that in the ways that I just outlined. You would think that the Democrats would rush to the floor to vote for this thing. Instead, they'll mischaracterize it at every step of the way. I just laid out the facts. The bill is 940 pages long. You want to read it for yourself. Don't believe what you hear in the media. Don't believe what the Democrats are going to tell you. Believe what I just told you, because these are facts that are indisputable. In fact, I'll close with this, Mr. President. I will guarantee you that there's not one thing I outlined here today, any of these aspects of the bill, that my colleagues will dispute, because they can't, because it's in the plain text of the bill. Instead, what they'll do is they'll use cliche lines like that, we're taking away health insurance from people who need it to give it to their billionaire buddies. You mean like George Soros? You mean like the founder of LinkedIn, who funded all kinds of nonsense, those billionaires, right? Look, you want to find the center of gravity today for the Democrat Party? Go to Martha's Vineyard, where the average price home is $30 million. That's their North Star. What's our North Star, Mr. President? Communities in your state, communities in my state, like Chillicothe, Ohio. That's the center of our gravity for our party. It's a new party. I'll acknowledge that. The Republican Party of today is not the party that I knew 20 or 30 years ago. And it was a mistake that we weren't thinking about the working class the way we are today. But here we are, on the verge of passing one big, beautiful bill. Now, look, if you're an American watching, I can see why you're confused. If I were somebody who was reading, for example, in my hometown newspaper, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, if I read that all day, I'd probably think something different, because it's all propaganda from the other side. I just laid it out. I would challenge anybody in the media, anybody listening to this, any of my Democrat colleagues, to come out here on the floor and go line by line with what I just said and tell me how what I just said is not true. This is what this bill is all about. I am so proud, Mr. President, that I had the honor of even being a tiny part of putting a bill that is so historic and so transformative. I urge all my Republican colleagues, every single one of them, to come out here on the floor. Let's get the motion to proceed going. Let's get the bill passed. Let's get it back to the House. To my House colleagues, come back, get this bill done, and let's celebrate July 4th with the greatest bill ever passed by the United States Congress. With that, I yield.
Senator from the great state of Texas.
Mr. President, I was here in 2017 when we passed the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and what ensued was perhaps the greatest amount of economic growth, the greatest reduction of unemployment among all sorts of folks who historically have suffered high unemployment rates. And in short, our economy was booming. Originally, we had some debates about whether or not this would have a static effect. In other words, when you start adding the numbers up, do you account for economic growth and the stimulative effect of the bill? As it turns out, the $1.5 trillion deficit in the original bill was met by economic growth, because we brought back money that had been invested abroad because of high tax rates here, and a variety of other measures which made our economy boom again. So the one point that I want to make sure and make is this is more than just about the numbers on a page. This is the cumulative effect of not only lowering taxes, but downsizing regulation, encouraging domestic energy production, and doing all of those things which will cause our economy to grow again. And if we can get our economy growing at a better rate, let's say 3% of our GDP, that will add trillions of dollars to the federal treasury and more than make up in any money that we end up providing in terms of tax relief. So I'm very excited about this particular legislation, what's now come to be known as the Big Beautiful Bill. But I've listened as our Democratic colleagues have criticized this bill, actually, which hasn't actually finally been written yet. It's getting close, and I hope we can start voting on the bill as early as later on today. But what strikes me as bizarre is our Democratic colleagues have offered zero alternative. Do they want a multi-trillion-dollar tax increase on the American people? That on top of 40-year high inflation, thanks to Bidenomics? Everything costs roughly on average 20% more than it did before the radical spending spree of the last administration, which threw gasoline on the fire of inflation and ate up the standard of living of most Americans and made their dollar worth about 20% less than it was beforehand. I think we have a better idea, and that is, no, we don't think you should increase taxes by trillions of dollars on top of 40-year high inflation, thanks to the Biden-Harris administration and their radical spending spree. I think most Americans would agree with us. So they have no alternative other than to raise taxes on hardworking American families. The other thing that this bill does is it increases the standard deduction. Most families don't necessarily even itemize their tax deductions, so the standard deduction is important. The child tax credit, we know that it's expensive to raise children, and so having an enhanced child tax credit is really important, and that is what this legislation will do. But the other thing that this bill does, as long as I've been in the Senate, we have never tried to undertake spending cuts necessary to deal with a $37 trillion in debt. We're now paying more interest on the national debt than we are on defense, which is unsustainable. We don't have to be reminded of recent events in Iran, for example, with Iran fast tracking toward a nuclear weapon. And thank goodness to the decisiveness and courage of our United States military and our commander-in-chief, President Trump. Iran is no longer on that fast track to build a nuclear weapon. But this is a very fragile, dangerous world we live in. The most dangerous since World War II. And none of us want to go down that path again. So the way we address that is to reestablish deterrence. American peace through strength. That's how we keep the peace, is through strength. And we can't do it if we don't have the money to spend on our defense, either on our personnel or on our weapons systems and the like. So our Democratic friends have no answer to any of this. Their answer, I guess, is to do nothing. There was a former Speaker of the House, Sam Rayburn, years ago, a Texan, who said, any jackass can kick down a barn, but it takes a skilled carpenter to build one. And we're doing our very best to try to build that barn. Is it perfect? No. But we are trying, and we believe that we're making tremendous progress on a number of fronts. And one area that's particularly important to me and my constituents in Texas, all 31 million of them, is finally to bring some security to our border. We were told during the Biden-Kamala Harris administration that we needed to pass some new laws back when the policies of the administration were open borders, and we're still paying the price, and we probably will pay the price for years to come. Criminals coming across the border, some of the dangerous gang members, illegal drugs, human trafficking of innocent children and women. But when we elected President Trump on November the 5th, it didn't take him very long to bring those numbers, those tens of thousands of people streaming across the border on a monthly basis, to bring that to near zero. And it didn't take any new laws. It just took a president willing to enforce the law. But it cost money to provide for the detention facilities and the personnel necessary to secure the border and to safeguard our country. And that's one of the other things that's in this bill that's so important. Money to build more infrastructure or the wall. More money to hire Border Patrol and Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents. And more money for detention facilities so that there are real consequences associated with coming into our country illegally. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, the money that's necessary to reestablish deterrence, to help our military. That is in this bill as well. And the answer of our Democratic colleagues is no, we don't think we should do anything to secure the border, to defend the nation, or to prevent a multi-trillion-dollar tax increase, along with the devastating economic consequences of hard-working Texas and American families. The only thing our colleagues on the other side have to say is this is going to help rich people at the expense of regular folks. One of our colleagues described the bill as handouts for billionaires, arguing that our legislation would cause the American people to, quote, suffer so that Jeff Bezos can buy another yacht. So what's her alternative to our legislation? Crickets. Nothing. It's a cheap shot. Looking west to Nevada, one of our colleagues has said this is a, quote, tax scam that hurts the middle class while giving trillions to the ultra-wealthy. Now, I realize these are probably focus group tested phrases that move the dial in the absence of any other information. But the fact of the matter is, this is false. And you know, I guess I'm old-fashioned. I was raised to believe that you should tell the truth and you should not lie. But up here in Washington, D.C., in the Congress, on things like this, lying seems to be the coin of the realm. And unfortunately, it has an impact if people don't know the truth, which is why we have to point out the important aspects of this legislation and what we are trying to do. These statements by our Democratic colleagues cannot be further from the truth. And here's the worst part. They know it. They know it, but they persist. This bill is anything but a reverse Robin Hood scheme. But I'm not surprised, I guess, that they are misrepresenting this bill in an attempt to scare the American people and maybe try to energize their political base. I think Democrats are a little desperate these days, seeing what happened in the New York mayoral election with an anti-Semitic socialist winning that nomination in New York. This is what the modern Democratic Party has become, the party of AOC and the radicals. And they wonder why they lost the last election in November. Well, those sort of politics and policies were rejected by the American people in favor of a president who will enforce the law and who will keep America safe. According to the Wall Street Journal, 62% of Americans will see a tax increase if we don't pass this extension. 62%. Well, that is obviously more than just people who are the well-to-do. Those are middle-class taxpayers. And, of course, President Trump has said he wants to further extend tax relief to the middle class, people who work in service industries, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. Those are genuinely middle-class tax cuts. And I guess our Democratic colleagues are opposed to those too. They think, I presume, that they ought to pay in the service industries, the middle-class, hard-working middle class in our country ought to pay more, not less. If we let the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions expire, households earning less than $400,000 a year will face a $2.6 trillion tax hike, with the average family of four earning $80,000 paying $1,700 more in taxes alone every year. In Texas, families will be saddled with $3,000 in additional taxes if we fail to extend these expiring provisions. And as I mentioned a moment ago, working families will see the child tax credit cut in half. Our Democratic colleagues won't tell you this, but the big, beautiful bill, as it's called, will prevent all of this and more. It increases the child tax credit, which is estimated to benefit 46 million American families. Are all of those the super rich? Well, I think not. These are average, hardworking, middle-class families who will benefit from the enhanced child tax credit. Our bill will help working Americans with provisions, as I said, like the no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. I would actually like to see some of our Democratic colleagues go out to their favorite restaurant and explain to their server that they support the U.S. government continuing to take a larger and larger cut of their earnings, their tips earnings. I doubt they would acknowledge that. I don't think that kind of suggestion would go over too well, but that's what they're doing by opposing this bill. And again, if they've got a better idea, let's hear it. Again, all we hear is crickets, silence, when they're not misrepresenting what the bill actually does. Another provision that is important, and this used to be bipartisan, back when Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton, a Republican speaker, a Democrat president of the United States, passed the Welfare Reform Act. Congress implemented reasonable working requirements for able-bodied adults. It's not good for people to sit on the couch and play video games all day when they are able-bodied. Work brings not only the ability to provide for yourself and your family a certain amount of dignity and self-respect, but it helps your community. It makes you a more productive, a happier person. And certainly it's not fair to the taxpayer to have them subsidize people sitting on the couch playing video games all day when they can contribute to their community and their family. One of our colleagues from Illinois said, Republicans are working to cut food and health care programs like SNAP and Medicaid. The so-called big, beautiful bill will hurt hardworking Americans to pay for tax cuts and billionaires, plain and simple. More propaganda, more disinformation, more untruths. The reforms to Medicaid, which is an important safety net, healthcare safety net, and SNAP, previously known as food stamps, included in the big, beautiful bill, will strengthen and safeguard our safety net for those who actually need it. In Medicaid, that money should not go to able-bodied adults. It should go to children, disabled, and pregnant women. That's the original target of Medicaid. That's where the safety net is important. But if you're giving that money and spending money on able-bodied adults, obviously that's going to detract from the money where the money should go to help those truly in need. And the same thing with food stamps or the SNAP program. Why in the world should taxpayers subsidize somebody who's capable of working and contributing to themselves and their family and their community by subsidizing them through food stamps? So a work requirement for able-bodied adults just makes sense. But I've been here in Washington, D.C. long enough to know that common sense isn't all that common up here. As I mentioned, the Welfare Reform Act of 1996, in a bipartisan fashion, implemented work requirements to temporary assistance to needy families, which was a welfare program, and it was remarkably successful in bringing those living in poverty into the labor force so they can earn a living, so they don't need to depend on Medicaid because maybe they have private health insurance through their employer. And it just makes sense on all of these means-tested programs, and by that it just means that have certain income requirements. If you fall below, you qualify. If you're above that earnings level, you don't qualify anymore, but why shouldn't we have those work requirements for all means-tested programs? Well, we should, and we will. Recent research from the Foundation for Government Accountability found that more than 62% of able-bodied adults who receive Medicaid don't work at all. 62% able-bodied adults sitting on a couch, playing video games, I guess. I don't know what you do all day. Watch TV. If you're able-bodied and you're capable of working, but you're not working. With the national debt exceeding $36 trillion a year and more than half of Medicaid beneficiaries who are able to work but sitting home idle, requiring these folks to at least start looking for a job is a common sense step in the right direction. We need to make sure that our safety nets are there for people who need them, not for people who don't need them. We need them to be secure for the seniors who've fallen on hard times and those who've fallen on hard times, and we have to make sure others are not abusing the system while bankrupting the country. Another way the big, beautiful bill safeguards our safety net is by strengthening eligibility checks. It's well known that people who in certain income levels tend to fall in and out of eligibility for some of these means-tested programs. Let's say they're working, but then they've lost a job, and until they can find another one, they need access to them. But once they get a job, then they no longer should qualify. So strengthening eligibility checks is an important reform. And not providing these benefits to illegal aliens. You know, the Border Patrol tells me in my many visits down there, and I've hosted many of my colleagues down at the border, they said there's push factors and there's pull factors to illegal immigration. The push factors are the normal ones you would expect: poverty, violence in your home country. But the pull factors are the incentives that are provided to people to come to our country illegally. And when we provide taxpayer benefits to people from other countries, it is a pull factor. It is an encouragement, an incentive, and particularly when there are no consequences to violating the law, as was the case during the 4 years of the last administration. Our colleagues across the aisle apparently think it's okay to take money out of your pocket and to give it to illegal aliens for benefits. And they see no problem with incentivizing more and more people to come across the border illegally. Well, this brings me to another important provision, which is important particularly to my state, the state of Texas. Thanks to the efforts of the Texas delegation in the House, this bill includes money to reimburse the state of Texas for border security measures that were undertaken in the absence of the federal government doing its job during the Biden administration. Our international border is a federal responsibility, but in the absence of the Biden administration enforcing the law, the state of Texas had no alternative but to implement Operation Lone Star, to provide the Department of Public Safety and the National Guard to help secure the border, to help stem the flow of drugs, to help slow down the human trafficking, and to slow down and stop as much of the illegal immigration as they could. And that came at significant expense to state taxpayers. This is not the state's responsibility, but the state had to bear the burden, and this bill reimburses Texas taxpayers for that unfair burden that was left as a result of the abdication of responsibility by the previous administration. Mr. President, these are just a few of the many important wins for the American people that are included in this big, beautiful bill. I wish we were in a different place where our Democratic colleagues would actually work with us and try to prevent a multi-trillion-dollar tax increase on 62% of American working families. But in the absence of their willingness to work with us, we have no choice but to get this done with just Republican votes. I encourage my fellow Republicans not to let the naysayers convince the American people that this is somehow bad for them, when the opposite is actually true. This is also, finally, an important part of President Trump delivering on the promises he made when he won a historic election last November the 5th. And it's our job to deliver on that electoral mandate by passing this agenda. This bill will do wonderful things for the 31 million people in my state and the 250 million people who call America home. And I look forward to supporting it when it comes to a floor in the coming hours and days. I yield the floor.
Leader.
Mr. President, I want the American people to understand exactly what's happening right now with Senate Republicans and their so-called big, beautiful bill. Senate Republicans are trying to pull a fast one on the American people. For weeks, they've struggled with the reality that most people hate this bill. Leadership has struggled to secure votes among their own ranks who know how bad the bill is. And now they've scrambled to meet an entirely arbitrary deadline. So what did the Republicans do late last night? Hard to believe. This bill is worse, even worse, than any draft we've seen this far. It's worse on health care. It's worse on SNAP. It's worse on the deficit. At the very last minute, Senate Republicans made their bill even more extreme to cater to the radicals in the House and Senate. Republicans are about to move forward with a radical 1,000-page bill, just made public in the last several hours, without knowing how many trillions it will cost. They don't even want to know a CBO score. They're afraid to show how badly this will increase the deficit. On this bill, a major bill that affects every part of American life, hiding the CBO scores in defiance of their own promises to cut the debt. Deficit hawks out there on the Republican side in the House and Senate. This bill makes the debt worse and the deficit worse, even worse than before. Future generations will be saddled with trillions in debt. Debt is abstract, but what does it mean for the average American? Raising your costs to buy a home, raising your costs to buy a car, raising your costs on credit card bills. And why are they doing all this? Why are they doing the biggest Medicaid cuts in history? Now it's getting close to $1 trillion just in Medicaid alone. All to cut taxes for the ultra-rich and special interests. And they did it while most Americans were asleep. It is astounding that this is the product Senate Republicans have come up with. Because for weeks, they kept saying they were somehow going to strengthen Medicaid, that they'd moderate, quote unquote, the House clean energy cuts, that nobody would lose benefits. Well, all of that has gone out the window. Those supposed moderates on the other side are falling like dominoes, ready to move on a bill that does precisely the opposite of what they claim. Many Republican senators have admitted they're not happy with this bill. One said it will take away health care from working people, and yet there's still a yes on this bill. If Republican senators are not happy with this bill because they know how badly it hurts their constituency, they should vote no. After all, they're United States senators. They have the power to vote however they want. Did they forget that was an option? Are they also afraid that they can't do what they know is the right thing for the American people? Just incredible, incredible. After weeks of hemming and hawing from Republicans, the bill they are ready to proceed with is the most extreme version of their bill yet. I guess when push comes to shove, leave it to Republicans to cave to their hard right flank. Under this draft, Republicans will take food away from hungry kids to pay for tax breaks to the rich. All the data shows Democrats don't like it, independents don't like it, and Republicans don't like cutting SNAP, taking food away from kids, all to pay for tax breaks for the wealthy. The SNAP cuts, and I'm sure we'll hear from Senator Klobuchar shortly, are every bit as bad as in the House, the worst in history ever. Those cuts are cruel. Those cuts are un-American. But it's what Republicans are getting ready to do. Meanwhile, Medicaid, where they've had so much controversy and back and forth, Medicaid will be fed to the sharks under this bill. In fact, we just got the news that CBO said the Medicaid cuts in this version are worse than any version of the Republican bill to date. Nearly $1 trillion in cuts, just to Medicaid alone. And there are more cuts for ACA and Medicare. Let me repeat. This version of the bill cuts nearly $1 trillion in Medicaid alone, worse than any version we have seen so far. $930 billion to be precise. And that does not count the many billions and billions and billions more in cuts to ACA and Medicare. Far worse than anything we have seen so far. The tiny tweaks that Republicans made to provide the provider to the provider tax will still decimate state budgets and do nothing to protect hospitals in the coming years. And what about the rural hospital fund Republicans have spent the last few days touting? It's a drop in the bucket. This rural hospital fund is a fig leaf. It's like putting a Band-Aid over an amputation and sending the patient home. When the rural hospitals start closing, just remember, the residents of those hospitals, the people who work in those hospitals, it's because of these cuts and no other reason. Rural hospitals, many of them will close. This Band-Aid ain't enough to cover even a small percentage of them. And healthcare costs will go up for everyone, even if you don't have Medicaid, even if you don't have ACA, even if you don't have Medicare. Your private insurance will go up dramatically every month. People hate paying those health insurance premiums. They're going to pay a lot more under this bill. And why are they doing all this? Why are they doing all this? We know why. Tax breaks for billionaires. Tax breaks for billionaires. And now, let's talk about another subject. The clean energy changes Republicans made last night. Frankly, I don't think even most Republicans realize just how radical these last-minute changes are. They are drafted to do one thing, to kill all wind and solar. All wind and solar. Solar, the cheapest way to produce new energy, the quickest way to produce new energy. We need more energy. AI is going to take up a lot of energy. If we don't have new sources of energy, all new sources, guess what? People's electricity bills will go up and up and up. When it comes to clean energy, the Republicans basically reverted and somehow exceeded the extreme policies that came out of the House. For days, they worked to modify those provisions, many Republicans, to make them less bad. Now they're made even worse. And these are policies, by the way, plenty of Senate Republicans said they were going to change. Under this new draft, clean energy projects in wind and solar will now need to be placed in service, not begun, in less than 2 years from now in order to qualify for a tax break. And the provisions related to Chinese involvement, which of course we want to fight against China, but the best way to fight against China is have a robust solar industry. China's going to run the whole solar industry for the world. And if you think they're not going to make Americans pay more as Chinese customers pay less, forget it. But anyway, on the provisions related to China, they made them almost unmanageable. It's going to kill nearly every wind and solar project out there because the standard is laughably unrealistic. What does it mean? Projects already in the works will shut down. It means that people will lose their jobs. It's estimated 840,000 jobs. Add that to the healthcare jobs. Wow. Americans will pay hundreds of dollars extra a year on electricity as soon as the next year. Thanks to the Senate Republicans caving in to big oil, it will be China, not the United States, that will likely becomes the world leader in energy production in the years to come. Self-destructive, needless, harmful to both our economic and national security. And it just shows how tight big oil's grip is on Senate Republicans. Remember, 80% of these clean energy investments, my colleagues, have gone to Republican districts. The investments support, as I said, over 800,000 jobs. Republicans are so beholden to the fossil fuel industry, they'd rather kill jobs in their own communities than upset the big oil lobby. Disgusting, shameless, and done, of course, while most Americans were asleep. So again, Republicans are trying to pull a fast one on the American people. Republicans are pulling a fast one even on their own members, and certainly on their own constituents. This will hurt the reddest of states badly. If Republicans proceed, Senate Democrats will hold them to account. We'll gear up for another night of vote-a-rama very soon. We'll expose this bill piece by piece. We will show how it cuts health care, raises costs, rewards the ultra-rich. We welcome this debate. And if Republicans proceed and follow Donald Trump over the cliff, with this bill tied to their ankles like an anvil, they will not only doom their own communities, they will doom their political fortunes, their own political fortunes, and have no one to blame but themselves. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
President,
Senator from the great state of Ohio.
are we on a quorum call?
We are.
Ask consent that the quorum be waived.
Without objection.
So, Mr. President, as I said earlier and I predicted earlier, our Democrat colleagues have come out and totally mischaracterized this bill. So let me just go through this again very slowly so that they can watch it and listen. So the question really is this a bill that helps working Americans, or is this a bill that helps billionaires? Which, again, let me just pause on the irony that it wasn't too long ago where they were saying millionaires until they themselves realized that they became millionaires. Again, different topic. If you take out a car loan for an American-made automobile and you can deduct that interest, the bill in the text specifies that you cannot make more than $100,000 per year. I think by definition, somebody who makes less than $100,000 a year is not a billionaire. So indisputable that that part of the bill does not help billionaires. It helps working Americans. Notice that was not addressed. Second, no tax on overtime. I don't think there's a lot of billionaires that punch a clock. That is clearly something that helps working Americans. No income tax on tips. Once again, I don't see a lot of billionaires serving us at restaurants, taking care of us at nail salons or barbershops. It is clearly something that helps working Americans. As I predicted, they did not address that particular provision. No tax on Social Security, and that is capped at $150,000 in income. Again, by definition, not a billionaire. A $5,000 tax increase that's prevented. That does not help billionaires. That helps working Americans that don't want to see their taxes go up. They didn't address that. Now, when 10 million illegals invade this country and drive down our wages, drive up our housing costs, do you think Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk are worried about the price of housing? Jeff Bezos just had a $55 million wedding in Italy. I don't think he's worried about his housing costs going up. I don't think there's a lot of criminal aliens that are going to Beverly Hills or Palo Alto or Martha's Vineyard to buy homes. They are going to places like Springfield, Ohio, where we saw our average rents go from about $1,000 to 2 or 3 times that amount because we had a surge of 18,000 aliens in a city of 50,000 people. Insurance prices went up because we had a massive amount of car accidents and crashes. That's real world. That happens, and that affects working Americans. And what this bill does is it deports them. Now, what isn't said by my Democrat colleagues is that they have a lot of their friends that love criminal alien labor. They can't complain. They get paid a lot less money. That doesn't benefit working Americans. Working Americans don't have 5 gardeners and 3 nannies at their house in Martha's Vineyard, but Democrat colleagues' friends sure do. Go spend a summer in Martha's Vineyard. You'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see decadence unlike something you've never seen in your life. $30, $40 million homes, private jets to get there. You know what they do? They sip cappuccinos in the morning talking about climate change when they heat and cool their homes 365 days a year. That's who funds the Democrat Party today, and it's quite sad, honestly, because the Democrat Party used to be the party for working class. It used to be the party that would champion things in this bill. A $2,200 child tax credit. Do you think that billionaires are really going to think about $2,200 as a child tax credit, something that they're really going to motivate them? Do you think that billionaires are going to rush out, get married, and have kids because they're going to get a $2,200 child tax credit? Or do you think it's going to allow them to buy groceries? You know, the Democrat leaders spoke about SNAP benefits and taking food away from children. Those are the kinds of hyperbolic statements that I think all of us here in the United States Senate should be above that. Nobody's suggesting that we take food literally out of the hands of children. But what their policies did do over the last 4 years, inadvertently maybe, I'll give them credit, raised grocery prices to the point where working Americans had to make a decision at the cash register whether to buy something or not. I saw it with my own eyes. I saw it with my own eyes as I went into Giant Eagle in Westlake, Ohio, and I would see people come in and to buy groceries, and they would have to make a decision. Maybe the bigger cereal box they can't do. Maybe they have to go to generics instead of the Kellogg's because their grocery bill is just too high. Imagine what that feels like You're a working American, you worked your whole life, and in front of your children, you have to look at them and say, I can't afford to get you cereal today. I can't afford to get you that extra snack that you wanted. They drove up the price of inflation. The one big beautiful bill will lower it. They didn't talk about that. They didn't talk about the $1,000 fund that goes into for American citizens. Again, do you think billionaires care whether $1,000 goes into a fund that can be maybe $100,000 or $200,000 when those kids turn 25, 30 years old? I don't think that makes a difference to Jeff Bezos. I think his children will be just fine. Something that helps working Americans. Again, they don't address that. At least be honest about your objection to the bill, and their objection to the bill is pretty straightforward. They don't want President Trump to get a win. Let's talk about health care. Do you think that billionaires worry about their health care premiums? Working Americans do. What are we doing? We're preserving these health care programs for the people who need them. We're strengthening Medicaid. What they've allowed to happen is that states have been gaming the federal government, drawing down funds to pay for other projects and other benefits. And the people who are going to be eliminated from the Medicaid system is illegal migrants. We shall see whether in this bill they object to that provision. Because in our current draft, again, they don't refer to this, it says that you cannot receive any welfare programs unless you're an American citizen. They'll have the opportunity to object and remove that from the bill. That doesn't help billionaires, but it does crush working Americans. They didn't talk about the dangers all over the world. Congo and Rwanda just signed a peace deal in the White House yesterday. Pakistan and India averted a massive war. We now have a ceasefire between Iran and Israel. In 6 months, President Trump has brought peace and prosperity around the world. But our military was depleted because they insisted on funding a proxy war with Russia. We're fixing that. They didn't talk about the investment in the Coast Guard. They would leave that out because, again, they want you to think that this bill is about billionaires. It certainly is not. They didn't talk about the air traffic control system. My colleague has been here almost as long as I've been alive. He had the opportunity, when he controlled this chamber, controlled the House, controlled the presidency, to fund a modernization of our air traffic control system. He didn't do it. He isn't talking about that. And he talked about the Green New Deal, the Green New Scam. Let's talk about that for a second. Let me just walk you through, if you're not familiar with what this is. Let's say that you want to build a solar project, for example, in London, Ohio. You can go out and buy acres of land, way more than market value. Why? Because the federal government will pay you 30% of what you think the project is worth. Let me just repeat that for a second. Say that a project's going to cost you $10 million to build. The federal government will pay you 30% of what you think it's worth. That's in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's what they call fair market value. So let's say you find a friendly appraiser that says, hey, this solar project is really worth $30 million. The federal government will write you a check for $9 million of the $10 million it costs to build that project. If you're really savvy, you then go to a bank. You say, hey, look, I got this project. It's worth all this money. Can you give me a loan? Maybe they get half, $5 million. Before it produces one electron, you've put $4 million in your pocket. Do you really care if the project succeeds? Why would you? You just made out like a bandit. This is why the Inflation Reduction Act, when it was passed, was supposed to cost about $1 trillion, and it's costing exponentially more than that. These are scams on the American people. Now in Ohio, we have thousands of years of natural gas. Thousands of years, the cleanest energy you can imagine, the most abundant, reliable energy. What did the Democrats in the previous administration do? Completely kneecapped it. Banned liquid natural gas exports, made it virtually impossible to explore for new natural gas, removed permits from federal lands, canceled the Keystone Pipeline. Who did that affect? Do you think that that billionaire buddy of one of my colleagues who has a compound on Martha's Vineyard cares if his energy price went up 30%? He does, by the way, doesn't even pay the bill. He has somebody who he knows that has somebody beneath him, that has somebody beneath them that actually pays the bills. He has no idea. If his energy price went up 30%, it wouldn't even affect their life. I was with somebody in Martha's Vineyard a couple, 3 years ago. And they gave a quote that I'll never forget, and I want to put this into the record. It's a quote from one of my Democrat colleagues. Now, in the spirit of decorum, I will not mention their name, but here's the quote. In front of a $35 million home that most of the guests flew there on private jets, that had several boats anchored with, by the way, gigantic outboard engines that used probably 30 gallons of gas every 5 minutes, said the following quote. Are you ready, Mr. President, for this quote? If you want to live like a Republican, vote for a Democrat. Think about how callous that is. They said the quiet part out loud. I'm proud, Mr. President, that you and I are part of a new Republican Party. I think you and I represent a new vision of the Republican Party, a party that's about helping working Americans actually live a better life. That's why I'm here. I know that's why you're here. And I know that's why you and I are so proud of this bill. And again, I'll close with this. And I know there's lots of noise out there right now all over this building. We have an opportunity to, for the first time in American history, say that in this chamber, in this Congress, with this president, we're going to make the lives of working Americans better the way I just outlined. And while my colleagues, I don't expect them, and it would be quite honestly odd for them to agree with us on everything. Just don't lie. Just don't come out here on the floor and say that this is a bill for billionaires. This is a bill for working Americans. And I would challenge any of my colleagues that are going to speak that when they make those statements, reference the page number and the exact line in the bill that helps billionaires. Just point that out. And by the way, on these solar scams, we're not banning solar panels. We're not banning windmills. What we're saying is we're not going to make you filthy rich if you build one of these projects. But if you want to build a solar panel project somewhere in Ohio, you can do it. You're just not going to do it with the massive subsidies from the federal government. So, Mr. President, again, I'll urge all of my colleagues, let's unite as a party. Let's show the American people that Republicans have the ability to govern, that we can come together to pass a transformative and historical bill. And with that, I yield. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from the great state of Minnesota.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
No, we are not.
Okay. Mr. President, I rise today to speak in strong opposition to the recently revealed Senate congressional budget bill. I will note that this is a 940-page bill that was just put out there at midnight. For me, that was a moment because, one, I realized that nothing has changed in terms of the proposal. It's actually added to the debt. And two, from about $3.4 trillion to one analysis says $4 trillion, and it actually adds more Medicaid cuts, another $100 billion, up to $900 billion in Medicaid cuts. Those are the top lines. I don't think anyone's had time to look at every single detail of that bill, but for me it meant something else. That meant that I knew that I was going to stay here along with my colleague Senator Smith, and because we have a job to do that is really important on this budget. But it was hard to not go home and grieve for one of my very good and beloved friends, Melissa Hortman, and her husband Mark, whose funeral was held today in our state. And I would have been there in person because of the gravity of the legislation we are considering today, but I was able to watch it online. One of the things that I most remember and will always remember from that funeral, in addition to the beauty of it, in addition to the trees and the bushes that awaited the guests outside, because Melissa loved the beauty of the world and cared a lot about the world around her, but it was the words of our Archbishop, Archbishop Hebda. It was a very religious service, full Mass. My husband got to be there and take part in that Mass. But Archbishop Hebda said at the close of the ceremony, he quoted the new Pope, Pope Leo, who recently said that politics is one of the greatest forms of charity. Melissa always believed that. She believed that in how she lived her life and got things done for people, whether it was school lunches or better paid family leave or more fairness for people in our state. She believed that to her core, and her husband did too. When their kids wrote just a few days after their parents were murdered by a madman, their two kids in their 20s, one is going to get married in December, his fiance was there, Melissa was planning the wedding. They asked people to make the world just a little bit better. They said, plant a tree, pet a dog, hopefully a golden retriever, because they love dogs so much. Do something small or big. So I figure that's what we're going to be doing the next few days. And this is big, but it's something that's going to make a difference to people in this country if we don't do something about this bill right now. What does this bill do? It kicks 16 million people off their health care. 16 million people off their health care. In order to finance tax cuts for the wealthiest, in order to give multimillionaires a $400,000 tax cut, that doesn't make the world a better place. Adding $4 trillion in debt, $1 trillion of it is interest, which is going to make mortgage rates go up. It's going to make it harder for young people to be able to maybe get their first house or pay their rent. It's putting it on their backs. It's putting it on their shoulders. That's why I don't see this as a big, beautiful bill. I see this as a big, beautiful betrayal of the hardworking people of this country. Why are our colleagues scrambling to get this done in 2 days just because the president sets a deadline and says, jump, and they say, how high? Why are they always rubber stamping things that they don't actually believe in? We still know this newest draft, the 940 pages that no one's really read. We know that the bill still rips away health care from millions of Americans and closes hundreds of rural hospitals. It still shifts costs to states and threatens food assistance for families across the country. It still adds trillions of dollars to the federal debt. People in this country, the more they hear about this, the more they don't like it. A Fox News poll recently, 60% of the people don't like it. 2 to 1 people say this isn't going to help me, it's going to help wealthy people. People on Medicaid, they don't want to lose access to health care. 1 out of 2 people in assisted living are actually on Medicaid. You know, when my dad was in assisted living, he had some savings. He was married 3 times, so a lot of that money had gone away. Better for talk about another time. But I knew the exact day that that savings was going to run out. I knew the exact saving day because I was going to move him over to a Catholic Charities place that actually took Medicaid, because that was the day that his Medicaid would kick in. And it gave me some solace, even though he was in a place that didn't take Medicaid, that I had a plan for him. I had a place for him to go. He worked hard his whole life. Grew up in a hardscrabble mining town. He deserved to have the end of his life be a life of dignity. This is not what the American people voted for. When I get out to rural Minnesota, I visit all of 87 counties every single year. I've done 49 so far, so I've been in a lot of our rural counties in the last 6 months. They are scared to death of what this is going to do to rural hospitals, because the debt is so huge in this bill, it actually triggers some rules on Medicare that will cut $500 billion in Medicare. In addition to the Medicaid cuts I already laid out, which are now up to $900 billion. That's devastating for rural hospitals. It's projected 300 rural hospitals will close. This is the lifeline for people in rural America. When they get something, a very, very serious illness, yeah, they'll go to another hospital in a maybe bigger area, bigger town, metro area. But when they need emergency care, unless they're going to get a helicopter coming in to get them, or they break a leg, and there's a lot of people working outside in rural areas, farming, logging, you name it, they need to have a local hospital there. They need to have local doctors there. There is no avoiding the facts. 16 million people cut off health care, closing over 300 rural hospitals and 500 nursing homes across the country. Republicans want to say the updated text will help rural providers with additional funding, but the bill is now making over $900 billion in cuts instead of the $800 billion when it comes to health care. I've heard from a working mom of 2 whose parents rely on Medicaid for health care. She told me she doesn't think it's fair to shift the cost of care to families like her to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy. Duh. She said we need to draw the line and say this is enough. I have heard from so many people across my state about the food assistance cut. 4 million people off of food assistance. You know what the vast majority of people on food assistance? Veterans, seniors, people with little kids, old people. Those are the people on food assistance. Grocery stores. In rural areas, you may have 1 grocery store in a town, more likely in a county, more likely in 4 counties. They are operating already, many of them are independent groceries, on thin change. You make these kind of thin margins, you make these kinds of cuts, to SNAP, the results are going to be that you're going to lose these grocery stores. As ranking member of the Senate Ag Committee, I have heard over and over again from farmers who are already facing headwinds. The Trump tariffs, they don't have markets now that they had markets before. The cuts to the international food assistance that we were always so proud of in this country, that was other organizations buying American farmers' food. The input costs, what's happening with avian flu and other things, and now you add this. This is food that's produced by American farmers when you cut $200 billion, as the Senate bill does, from the SNAP program. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has confirmed that the Senate bill would end SNAP for 2.9 million Americans, including over nearly a million seniors and 270,000 veterans. The bill passed by the House would add $3.4 trillion, as I noticed, to the national debt, and this Senate bill is now up to $4 trillion. And it uses this funky budgeting, which, let me just explain it an easy way. It's called baseline budgeting. Everyone that looks at this from the outside says, this is a $4 trillion debt adder. But they use something where they say, okay, let's say, the Washington Post did this today. You go to a movie and you buy a movie ticket, let's say it's $10. Then you get some pop, then you do that 1 week, and then, because you want to see that F1 movie, the new movie, then 2 weeks later, you go and you want to see it again, but you get some popcorn for $5, small popcorn for $5. Okay, instead of saying you're paying your $10 for the ticket and your $5 for the popcorn, they say, oh, it's only $5, because that's how much it went up over the last few weeks. That's the funky budgeting. That's the joke. That's the faux budgeting that's going on the other side. $4 trillion in 10 years, that is what it costs. This is not what Americans voted for. The president promised to lower costs and stand up for the middle class. This bill does the opposite. It raises costs. It takes from working people to pad the pockets of the wealthy. And that is why this bill is so unpopular. Whether it is a mom from Louisiana whose son has Down syndrome and counts on Medicaid, or a bus driver from Kansas, like the one I met, who uses SNAP to feed her kids, the American people are speaking out against this bill. We will have the weekend to fight this bill. And I think people in the middle of the summer, maybe they're not tuned in, but they better tune in, because we should be protecting health care, not taking it away, defending food assistance, not raising grocery costs. We should not be giving tax breaks to the wealthy. We should be helping out the middle class and hardworking Americans. That's what our job should be. It's not what this bill is. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we have before us today a once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver legislation to create a safer, stronger, and more prosperous America. With one bill, we can deliver on a number of priorities: tax relief for hardworking Americans, economic growth, a stronger national defense, a more secure border, a more reliable energy supply, and reductions in waste, fraud, and abuse across the federal government. Mr. President, we seldom have an opportunity to take the kind of action that we're planning to take on just one of these priorities, let alone all of them. When was the last time we considered legislation like this to give a $150 billion boost to our defense spending? Any serious declines in our military readiness, I should say after serious declines in our military readiness, we are on the verge of notable investment in a number of critical military priorities: shipbuilding, missile defense, defense manufacturing capacity, critical munitions, drones and counter-drone technology, an expanded Air Force fighter fleet, nuclear modernization, U.S. infrastructure in the Pacific, and more. And while it's no substitute for robust yearly defense funding, our bill represents a real chance to start to turn our readiness deficiencies around. There is no time, Mr. President, in which we can afford to let our military readiness slide. But above all, at this time of increased global instability, it is especially vital that we ensure that our military has the resources it needs to deter our enemies and defend our country. So just by itself, the national defense section of our reconciliation bill represents a historic opportunity. And that's just one section of the bill. We're also looking at historic investment in border security, $160 billion. Yeah, that's right, $160 billion to undo the damage done by the Biden border crisis and secure our border for the long term. More Border Patrol agents, more immigration and customs enforcement agents, funding to complete the border wall and implement critical border technology. Mr. President, it's all there. We have the opportunity to take the gains the Trump administration has made in securing our border and deporting criminals and make that progress permanent. Like the defense section, the border security provisions of this bill would be an impressive and historic piece of legislation all on their own. But again, they're just one section. We're also looking at the chance to increase our energy independence, making us safer and more prosperous. And we're looking at an exceedingly rare opportunity to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, including the first real entitlement reform in decades. Reform that will put these programs on a more sustainable path for today's recipients and for tomorrow's. Once again, impressive opportunities all on their own. But even more incredible when you consider that we're looking at the prospect of being able to do all of these things in one bill. And then, of course, Mr. President, there's the tax relief. Talk about a section of the bill that would be an achievement all on its own. We're looking at the opportunity to make the 2017 tax relief permanent. That means permanently extending the lower tax rates, permanently extending the increased standard deduction, and not only permanently extending the enhanced child tax credit, but enhancing it even further to $2,200 per child and linking it to inflation so its value will never go down. But not just that. There's more. We're eliminating taxes on tips for millions of tipped workers. We're eliminating taxes on overtime for millions of hourly workers. We're putting in place an auto loan interest deductible when you buy a new car manufactured here in the United States. And we're increasing the standard deduction for millions of low and middle income seniors, making their retirement a little easier and more prosperous. We're also implementing a program to create savings accounts for newborns with an initial deposit of $1,000 to help parents save and invest for their children's future needs. And Mr. President, that's still not all. We're also looking at the chance to grow our economy by making the rest of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act business tax relief permanent. That means lower effective rates for small and medium-sized businesses. The job-creating 199A small business deduction, and full expensing for new equipment and for domestic research and development. And we're adding to the 2017 tax relief with new pro-growth provisions, like a provision to boost domestic manufacturing by implementing full expensing for new factories and factory improvements. Thanks to the pro-growth provisions in our legislation, we can expect to see GDP as much as 4.9% higher as a result of our bill. And that, of course, Mr. President, means more jobs and opportunities and better wages for hardworking Americans. Mr. President, Republicans made some promises to the American people last November. We promised to grow our economy, to extend the 2017 tax relief and prevent a $4 trillion tax hike on the American people, to secure our border and enhance the safety of our communities, to unleash American energy. We made those promises, and the American people elected us to office. Now they expect us to deliver. The opportunity is before us to deliver on our promises and make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. 53 members will never agree on every detail of legislation. Let's face it. But Republicans are united in our commitment to what we're doing in this bill: securing our border, strengthening our national defense, growing our economy, unleashing American energy, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, and preventing tax hikes on hardworking Americans. Mr. President, it's time to get this legislation across the finish line. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the Always do that. Mr. President, I understand that there's a bill at the desk that is due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for a second time.
H.R. 1, an act to provide for reconciliation pursuant to Title II of H-Con Res 14.
Mr. President, in order to place the bill on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I would object to further proceeding.
Objection having been heard, the bill be placed on the calendar.
Thank you. President, I would suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.